Good morning, everyone. We're going to get started, so welcome. I am Ernesto Burden. I'm honored to be here. I'm the publisher of New Hampshire Magazine and New Hampshire Business Review, and a magazine that we launched a couple of years ago called 603 Diversity. We launched that in the summer of 2020. And at the time that we were launching that magazine and some New Hampshire Business Review workshops called DEI, From Talk to Action, aimed at leaders in the business community. One of our greatest resources, somebody who lent a tremendous amount of time helping us develop those initiatives in a way that didn't step in every single pothole you could possibly step in while you're doing this kind of work, was James McKim. So when James asked me to open things today, I was delighted to repay in some small way the great amount of work he has done on our behalf and on this community's behalf. So thank you, James, for having me. I would say a lot has changed since the summer of 2020 in terms of how the business community perceives DEI, and we see that both in reaction to our own events and in dealing with some people renewing and engaging at even greater levels in advertising support in our 603 Diversity magazine, while others seem to be done with it. And I think this discussion today will really get at the heart of that changing sentiment around DEI that we've seen since the summer of 2020. My pleasure to also thank our sponsors today: Organizational Ignition, our breakfast sponsor, Northeast Delta Dental, our media sponsor, Yankee Publishing, New Hampshire Group, that's us. Table sponsors, Upton Hatfield, Sanborn Diversity Training Solutions, Diversity Workforce Coalition, and Empower Success Corps. And finally, today's program, a quick overview. We are going to be hearing after this from Amy Spencer on the SCOTUS decision, describing that. We'll hear some DEI goal setting presentation from James, which is excellent, and then a panel discussion followed by a Q&A. And to kick us off, not here on the list, is Joseph Favazza, president of St. Anselm College. Joseph, welcome.
Good morning. I just wanted to add my welcome. It is a pleasure to have you here on campus. As you know, this New Hampshire Institute of Politics. We have a few things going on here, particularly this year, but we're really happy to host this today. James has been a great partner to us in so many ways and has helped us in some of our own initiatives. This is a really important conversation, and at St. Anselm, we are committed to access and helping every student who wants to come here to thrive and to be able to come here. But it is a bumpy road sometimes. And the decision, the SCOTUS decision, has not made things more complicated for us necessarily. We have not in the past used race as a criteria for admission. But how do we continue to be a campus that is diverse, that is inclusive, that creates a sense of belonging, and continues to work on our own climate so that students from every background and every ethnicity feels welcome. So it is a really, really important conversation. So again, glad you're here. Thank you for being here, and I hope it's a wonderful day for all of you.
Thank you, Joseph. And now I'd like to introduce Amy Spencer. Amy is a member of the Government Investigations and White Collar Defense Practice Group and the Higher Education Team at Nixon Peabody LLP. She represents and advises organizations and individuals in investigations, regulatory inquiries, and complex criminal and civil matters involving securities and financial fraud, Title IX, NCAA compliance, Section 1981, DEIJ, post students for fair admissions, and other federal and state law matters. In addition, Amy works to vindicate clients' due process, First Amendment, and voting rights. She was part of a team that successfully challenged Senate Bill 3, a law that sought to complicate the New Hampshire voter registration process, resulting in the New Hampshire Supreme Court ultimately striking the law as unconstitutional. Amy is the chair of the Federal Practice Section of New Hampshire Bar Association, and she is also a member of the Federal Court Advisory Committee for the United States District Court for the District of New Hampshire, the New Hampshire Women's Bar Association, and the New Hampshire Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. Amy is also licensed in Massachusetts, New York, and California. She has served as a law clerk for Judge Stephen J. McAuliffe, DNH, Judges Kevin Thomas Duffy and John E. Sprizzo, SDNY, and Judge Carolyn Dineen King, Fifth Circuit. Amy received her JD from Loyola Law School in Los Angeles and her BA from Columbia College. Amy, welcome.
Good morning, everyone. First off, I'd like to say just how privileged I am to be here with all of you today, and how thankful I am for St. Anselm's and James McKim and all of you for your commitment to this extraordinarily important issue. And I'm humbled by that very generous introduction. So as usual, I've probably over-prepared. James asked me if I wanted 15 minutes. I said, no, 10 will be fine. So I want to kind of just give you an overview of what the Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard and University of North Carolina case both didn't say and did say. And if we have a little time, I know the panel will get to this in much more detail, but what its implications are, if any, more broadly for employment, public and private. So we'll just kind of dig in. So what did the court say? Well, the court said that the universities, both public and private, consideration specifically of an individual's race in the admissions process is unconstitutional and violates both Title VI for private institutions that receive public funds and the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment with respect to the University of North Carolina. Interestingly, it also said that in this context, at least, the standard under Title VI and the 14th Amendment is the same, which is different, I'll note, from the Title IX context, where due process for public institutions is more broad than it is for private institutions receiving public funds. So how did it get there? The court applied strict scrutiny, which for the lawyers here will know what that means without more, but basically it means that in order for a policy to survive constitutional consideration, the goal has to be, quote, compelling, and according to whom, right? But in this instance, according to the 9 justices of the Supreme Court, and the means must be narrowly tailored or closely fit to the goals that the institution has. And at risk of spoiler alert, the court found, contrary to some of its prior decisions, including Grutter v. Bollinger, that the goal of diversity for diversity's sake, essentially, was no longer, I'll say, a compelling interest. And the court reasoned that was because it wasn't easily susceptible to judicial scrutiny. Well, no kidding, right? And the court also held that the means that the schools were using, the specific means of specifically asking and including race as what they were calling a plus factor, wasn't a close enough fit to the goal of diversifying the campus more generally. And they said that was in part because it was both over-inclusive and under-inclusive, which you know, of course, you can read between the lines. What potato, where do you land? So let's see here. Lastly, I want to point this out because this is really important for today's conversation. The context of this case was the admissions process of public and private universities. Technically, it didn't say anything about public employment in the holding. It didn't say anything about private employment. It didn't say anything about scholarships or programs like that. But the context has been, of course, broadened by both the coverage the case has received and also the implications, especially in Judge Gorsuch's concurrence, where he did expressly analogize Title VI to Title VII, which I'm sure you'll hear more about later today. But what can schools still do, according to the Supreme Court? Well, the court held that schools can still consider, the applicant's individual discussion of how race has affected his or her or their lives and how they have had to struggle to overcome discrimination. Well, as the dissent pointed out, that is quite an opportunity, I guess, to really not lose much while losing, some of what the schools have done before. Now, the majority cautioned not to interpret that as the exception that swallows the rule, but that there have definitely been conversations in the higher ed context where schools that have a recognized commitment and policy statement supporting diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice, who then, to go ahead here a little bit, not that far, who then take specific means like reaching out to geographic areas that may be not well represented in the institution, or taking into consideration factors like socioeconomic status and things like Texas and California have done, taking the top 10 or 15% of every high school in the region. Those are still available to both public and private institutions in the aftermath of Students for Fair admissions. The Department of Justice and the Department of Education, shortly after the decision came out, also weighed in and specifically interpreted the decision to do exactly what I just kind of alluded to, that the institutions of higher education may continue to take targeted approaches to outreach, recruitment, and pathway programs. And this letter specifically, I think, is important. I know it was important in the law firm context, and I think it is important more largely in the employment context, that the types of programs that we generally think of in terms of DEI are probably fairly safe, frankly, in the aftermath of Students for Fair admission. As long as a few law firms found out when they too were sued by the person behind Students for Fair admission, as long as the program itself doesn't use race as an express factor, but takes into account those kind of broader categories that are aimed at increasing the diversity of the institution or the organization, the recruitment programs, the outreach programs, and the pathway programs are permissible, and can even be they can give preference to the folks who participate in those, as long as they themselves don't have race as an express factor for admission into the program. So this is the Gorsuch foreshadowing and something of real concern that I'm sure you will hear more about later today. So where are we? Here we are there are differing opinions, of course, from different voices. In the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, there are folks that are using this decision to push further than what the decision actually held. Then there are also, of course, folks who are looking to the types of things that we just talked about to kind of quiet the room and say, you know, well, we need to put all of this into perspective. Similarly, there are the Attorney General's offices all across the country that are weighing in on these issues. And as one might expect, there were 13 states who sent an open letter to some Fortune 100 companies, essentially saying, you know, look, this is serious. These are violations, and we're watching you. Then there were 21 attorneys general who said, so what? Similarly, I alluded earlier, there was a lawsuit that was filed against two, at least, major international law firms that was dropped this past month in October. The law firms made some concessions, but they did not do away with their fellowship programs. They simply opened them up on paper at least, and in practice to everyone. Everyone can apply, and then they will apply the categories and characteristics that we've talked about to choose their recipients. But there's definitely room for movement in this space, even after this decision. So some of the takeaways, lastly, that I think have been interpreted from the decision is that a lot of the DEI objectives and goals that you're going to hear about from James McKim, and a lot of the strategies I think that a lot of companies and law firms are employing will continue and will be permissible. There may be challenges, but there are arguments both within and outside of the Students for Fair Admissions opinion that will allow, I think, those of us committed to expanding diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice efforts to do so nonetheless. Enjoy the panel, and thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Wonderfully precise on the timing, too. Next, I'd like to introduce James McKim, who we've already spoken about, and I'm sure you all know, but I'll read his biography anyway, because it's pretty good. James is the founder and managing partner of Organizational Ignition, a management consulting practice. He is a sought-after organizational performance speaker, coach, change manager, and author of the best-selling book, The Diversity Factor: Igniting Superior Organizational Performance. Over his 35-plus-year career, he has helped small and large organizations, for-profit and nonprofit, spark efficiency and growth through the aligning of people, processes, and technology. James is known internationally for his current focus on organizational and individual performance through diversity, equity, and inclusion. He is recognized by industry watchers such as ATD, Brandon Hall, Burson Associates, Alexos, and PMI for his dedication to creating win-win situations between organizations and their employees. In addition to founding 2 companies, he has held senior leadership roles at or worked with organizations such as Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, Fidelity, Dartmouth-Hitchcock, and the Massachusetts Partnership for Diversity in Education in defining and executing strategic plans with an eye toward organizational performance. As the chair of the Episcopal Church's National Executive Council Committee Anti-Racism and Reconciliation, Mr. McKim, James, was the principal writer of the church's guidelines on anti-racism and reconciliation. As president of the Manchester branch of the NAACP, he works regularly with governments and businesses to eliminate discrimination. He is a frequent conference presenter, a guest on radio and television shows, serves as chair of finance committee of the NHPBS board of directors, and this is the best part, and he delights in being the vocalist for the jazz band, the Episcopats. Episco Cats. There we go. I knew I could get that. James, please come on up.
Well, I want to thank everybody for being here, folks who are in the room and folks online as we're projecting this around the globe through the magic of Zoom. So I want to start off with a little cartoon, and some of you who've seen me speak before may have seen this cartoon before. I want to give you a second to look at this. Then have the question for you. What's odd about this picture? What's odd about it? People are not neutral, people are diverse, right? There's a paradox here. How do we create an environment that is gender neutral, ethnic neutral, and age neutral while we celebrate the spirit of diversity? This speaks to what psychologists call the paradox of diversity, where on one hand, we see ourselves as individuals, not like anybody else, while at the same time, we see ourselves just like everybody else. We breathe the same air, our blood is red. So we go through life with this paradox. And our organizations have to deal with us in our schizoid minds with this paradox. How does someone know which perspective a person is taking at any one point in time? Am I thinking like I'm an individual like no one else? Or am I thinking I'm just like everybody else? What's your mindset right now? Right? This is why this is so difficult for us. So I want to get a sense of who's in the room. And I think I know most folks in the room, so I can probably tell this, but where are the lawyers in the room? All right, so this half of the room mostly. Where are the executives in the room from organizations? All right. Where are my DEI strategists and consultants? My crew, got a few there. Yep, great. Others that I haven't talked about? All right, some others. Excellent, excellent. So glad to have you all here. So what I wanted to try to do with the time I have is to help you to understand the different types of DEI goals that you can define, right? And the way I want to do that is to first talk about what is organizational performance, because what I'm really focused on is how do we ignite superior organizational performance. See how I slipped the book title in there? It's about organizational performance. So we want to make sure we're clear on the definition of DEI, B, J, whatever acronym set you use to start with. And then I want to talk about what is DEI maturity, right? Where are we going with DEI in our organizations? What's a vision? And then talk about the three types of DEI goals that might help us to get to our vision. So first of all, what's organizational performance? We kind of use this term, but do we stop to really define it? And if we do define it, what do we usually think of when we think of organizational performance? What do we usually think of? Profit, finances, retention sometimes, right? Impact. I love the definition from Universalia in the International Development Resource Center that says that organizational performance is the balance of effectiveness, efficiency, relevance, and financial viability. This more holistic definition is what I really love. When we're talking about effectiveness, we're talking about, are we actually achieving what we say we're going to achieve, our mission, right? Are we truly reaching the levels that we want to reach? Are we decreasing poverty? Are we increasing the number of roads? Are we reaching our customers and helping them to perform some function that they want to perform? This is the truth in advertising notion. And what McKinsey says is that organizations that live into DEI have 27% superior value creation. When we think of efficiency, we think of the gazintas and the gazautas. Anybody heard of the gazintas and the gazautas before? It's a technical term. Some of you know I'm a technologist by training, right? So we're talking about the fact that organizations have limited resources and need to use those resources wisely and efficiently. What goes into the organization, the gazintas, needs to come out of the organization, the gazoutas, as efficiently as possible, right? And that's externally to our customers and our clients, as well as internally. We talk about internal staff productivity as well. People Match says that organizations that live into diversity, equity, and inclusion make 87% better decisions. They're more innovative. And when we talk about relevance, we're asking about the relevance of our products or our programs to our stakeholders, not just our clients or customers, but all of the people who have a stake in the success of the organization. Research says that organizations that live into DEI are 70% more likely to capture new markets and be better at servicing a broad target audience. And then there is this financial viability piece, not just profitability, but long-term financial viability. Funding resources that are applicable over the long term. McKinsey says that organizations that live into DEI are 27% more likely to outperform their peers in EBIT. So this is the organizational performance picture, the reason why we really want to pay attention to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, again, I want to go back to definitions. We don't define our terms, we just tend to use them. So what is DEI, B, J? What do those acronyms really mean? Well, first, the D for diversity. Most people, when they think of diversity, are thinking about either race or gender. But there's a much broader definition. And I love what Marilyn Loden from Johns Hopkins Institute came up with as a framework for talking about diversity. And she coined the diversity wheel. And I'm showing you a version of what she developed back in 1991. And she said it's all about our personalities. Our personalities have different dimensions. So there's a dimension of our personalities, or dimensions that are internal to us, go to the core of who we really are, our race, our age, our gender. Then there are these external dimensions that are how we are perceived and interact with others. Where are we geographically? Well, we're New Hampshireites, New Englanders for the most part, right? And we've got people from outside of New England probably here too, but where you live is actually part of your personality. We talk about what's our marital status, what's our education level, our socioeconomic status. Those are all part of our personality as well. And then how do we interact in an organization? Are we a senior person or a junior person? Are we a manager or an individual contributor? What's our function in the organization? We sales, we marketing, are we R&D? So the question is, what is our personality makeup that makes us who we are? And the research says that when you have different perspectives, you get better performance. You get those results that I talked about. And how do you get different perspectives? From having these different personality dimensions in your organization. Then there's this notion of equity versus equality. Right? We tend to think of those terms as interchangeable, but they are not. And this cartoon kind of shows why. Who's seen this cartoon before? All right, almost everybody's seen this cartoon before. So which one of these panels shows equal treatment? One on the left? Right, because the three youths are different sizes, trying to see over the fence, are given the same assistance. They're being treated equally, which does not work for this shortest youth. But equitable treatment, this middle one, works for everybody, which means this tallest youth gets what? No help. This is where we get complaints. You helped everybody else, but you didn't help me, but you didn't need help. What about this third panel? What's a word that might describe this third panel, Andy? Universal design in higher ed. Justice. Justice is a word that many people use to describe that because there are no barriers in the first place. Think about your organizations. Where are there barriers to people being able to do what they need to do? Where are there policies and procedures and best practices that are barriers to success? Or providing equal treatment where it needs to provide equitable treatment. Then we have this inclusion thing. Inclusion is really a noun and a verb. It's a noun in that it's a state of being. We're an inclusive state. But it's a verb in that it's an action. To be inclusive, you have to take action. I love the physician's assistant for 5th edition definition that says inclusion is the active, intentional, ongoing engagement with people. The active, intentional, ongoing engagement with people. How many of you have an open door policy in your organizations, right? Does that mean that your organization is inclusive? I'd suggest not necessarily. If you don't invite people into that door, you're not an inclusive organization. So we've got those 3 terms defined, but the key is, if you recall when I was talking about the benefits, I said living into DEI. I didn't just say diverse organizations, right? I said living into DEI. And that's because you have to have all 3 of these to have a culture of belonging, a culture where people feel like they really belong. Having 1 or 2 of these doesn't cut it. And you can see that in this little Venn diagram. If you have diversity and inclusion, but you don't have equity, then you have a dominant group or ideology that is deferred to in all decision-making. If you have diversity and equity, but you don't have inclusion, then you have cultural assimilation and disengagement and attrition. If you have equity and inclusion, but you don't have diversity, you have an oversaturation of similarity in ideas. So you really need all 3 of these to create an environment, a culture where people feel like they belong. And this is what we're really getting at when we're talking about the SCOTUS decision. The SCOTUS decision is really focused on the racial piece of this. It's not focused on all the rest of this. And that's the good news here. I'm not going to get religious on you or anything, but that's the good news here. There's so much more to DEI than just that narrow piece that the Supreme Court talked about. So I want to shift now a little bit and talk about what is DEI maturity? What does that look like in an organization? Deloitte and PricewaterhouseCoopers, major consulting firms, and others have created different maturity models. And I merged the Deloitte and the PwC models together when I work with organizations. And they all have similar constructs. So they all have this notion of a center of gravity, that is, who's driving the effort. And they have a notion of focus. What's the focus of the effort? What's being done? So at the lowest level, which is referred to as compliance, the drivers, the center of gravity, are the lawyers in the room. And probably HR folks, right? And maybe there's a DEI team that's been developed. But the focus is EEOC compliance here in the United States. And that's about it, right? PricewaterhouseCoopers, our PwC, calls this the emerging level. The next level up, though, legal's not really driving the effort anymore. It's more HR and the diversity team. And the focus here is increasing representation of specific demographic groups like women, right? PwC calls this the basic level. The next level up, though, is where we get business leaders, department heads, who are now the center of gravity driving the DEI effort. And the focus is looking at policies and procedures leveling the playing field for all employees. PwC calls this progressing level. And then we get to this highest level, which is where the whole organization, everyone, is driving, leveraging difference to create business value. We say that DEI is in the DNA of the organization. Right? So we see we start off in these lower levels as being handling DEI as a mandate. It's being foisted upon us, versus where we hit this transition point, getting to the point where we see the value from an organizational performance perspective. And that's where we want our organizations to head. Now, what we see is, well, let me ask you, think for a minute, for your organization, where is your organization on this maturity chart? Where would you like to be? You'd love to be integrated. Some organizations will never make it to integrated. It will take years to get to progressing. This is not an overnight thing. So, Amy talked about the SCOTUS decision. It's my contention, and I know that there's some people who will disagree with this, but the title of this session is SCOTUS Prohibits Affirmative Action, but Validates DEI. Now, while they didn't explicitly say, well, DEI is good, look at the wording of the decision. At the same time, nothing prohibits universities from considering an applicant's discussion of race tied to the quality and character or unique ability. That word unique to me says they're affirming diversity, equity, and inclusion, because they're actually using this word unique. So the three types of goals, DEI goals, there are representational goals, and this is the area where there's a little caution because of the SCOTUS decision. But I only say a little bit of caution because we've talked about all these other types of issues around DEI that we have the ability to focus on. So the types of goals that we want to be careful about, and that our representational goals are, we want 5 women on our board. You can't say that. But you can say things like, we want our board to represent those we serve. Right? There are proactive goals, goals that prevent negative situations from happening or improve your internal organizational culture. Things like, we want to have pay equity. We want to create an employee resource group. Those are goals that you can have that are proactive in nature. Then there are these, what we call value add goals. Providing or adding non-English support is that kind of goal. That adds value for your customers, for your clients. I've identified in 4 different areas 20 different goal types that you could, in fact, take advantage of. From a business perspective, you can have PR goals. How many press instances have you had around discrimination or around employees complaining? If you've had 5, you can have a goal that says we'll have 2 next year. You could have legal kinds of goals. You could have market penetration goals. We want to get to different demographics next year. You can have customer satisfaction goals. From a people perspective, we're looking at our talent life cycle, looking at representation metrics, yes, as we talked about, but recruitment. You can recruit. You can broaden your target audience and focus your target audience. You can have staff placement metrics, transaction metrics, looking at how many promotions have you had for different demographics in your organization. You can have training metrics, how much training you've had on DEI. Do you have training every year on DEI? Workplace metrics. retention metrics, employee satisfaction metrics that tell you for different demographics in your organization, how are we doing? From a process perspective, how many ideas are you getting from different personality dimensions in your organization? Are your suppliers diverse? Are they thinking about diversity? What's your decision-making process? Are you ensuring that bias doesn't creep into every step of that process? From a technology perspective and a facilities perspective, are you looking at the environmental impact of your decisions? Is your building accessible? Are you Section 508 compliance with your computer systems? Are you looking at gathering diversity data? So hopefully with that, we've talked about what is organizational performance, that broad definition. We've talked about what DEI really is, DEIJ, DEIB. We talked about the maturity model for DEI and where you can vision your organization. And we've talked about the 3 different goals types for DEI, which give you a broad palette to use as you look at your DEI efforts. So with that, we're going to switch to the panel. So I invite our panelists to come up. Thank you. All right, can you hear me now? So that was a lot to digest from Amy's talk and from my talk, right? What I really am so pleased to have these gentlemen on the stage, and you'll notice that I said gentlemen. I had hoped that Amy would be able to be on the panel to make it less all guys up here. But Amy had an emergency situation with the client, so she had to bow out. So, but want to thank her. Didn't she do a great job with that description of the decision? All right, so I wanted to just take a minute to let everybody do a quick introduction. We've got David Pease, Senior Vice President and Director of Talent of Diversity and Inclusion at Bangor Savings. Ryan King, who's Vice President of Human Resources at Northeast Delta Dental, our breakfast sponsor. Thanks again so much for playing that role. Michael Atkins, who is with Shaheen and Gordon and also serves as the Legal Redress Chair for the Nashua branch of the NAACP. And Jill Bissonette. Jill needs no introduction from the ACLU. Done such great, fantastic work in upholding civil rights here in the state of New Hampshire. So I wanted to just ask you all first as a question, and hopefully you've got your mics, and when you probably have to turn it on to when you respond. What was your reaction when you first heard the SCOTUS decision? Let's go with David first.
Again, I think there was in the diversity officer group, it was like, oh no, what's going to happen? So I think like anything with change, right? People get nervous. People wonder how this is going to impact them. And I think, you know, there was a lot of conversation in the diversity community about how this would affect the work that we're doing with DEI. But quickly, I mean, at least I discovered it wasn't really going to impact us at all. We did kind of look at our policies to make sure that we weren't loosely defining anything. We really looked at kind of our whole structure and felt like we are good to go. Diversity is a very broad concept for us. We are trying to create inclusion and belonging for all employees. We're in this business to treat our customers with dignity and respect. So we felt like anything that we were doing was clearly moving forward. And we had the full support of our CEO and our board doing that.
So talk a little bit about what your DEI goals are.
I mean, I think our goals are pretty simple, which is we want to represent this, the employees and customers in the state of Maine and New Hampshire, which we operate. And we know that continues to change. And as an organization that has been on, one of the best employers list in New Hampshire for 3 years in the 5 years we've operated here, for the last 16 years in Maine, being the highest level of customer satisfaction in New England for any bank, and being one of Forbes' world's best bank, there's a high, expectation to continue to serve the changing needs of our organization. And we know, as a bank, a community bank, a big part of our product, if you will, is our customers need to trust us. So if you are a BIPOC community, or you are part of the LGBT community, it is really important that you see those folks in our employees, right? And the only way that we can truly serve and create trust with our customers is to ensure that we have a diverse group of employees. And again, I think one of our big focuses, other than being a great employer, was also the innovation that you talked about, James, in your goal. That was one of our goals 5 years ago. So we knew the only way that we would truly be innovative and differentiate ourselves in a very commodity sort of business as banking was to do things differently. And we knew the only way that we could really differentiate ourselves in banking was through innovative products and services, through unique perspectives.
Great. Ryan, Delta Dental's goals and your impression when you heard the decision.
My impression was very similar to yours. At first you have that panic reaction, like, oh my God, are we in trouble here? And like you, we slowed ourselves down. We reviewed our policies. We reviewed what we've been doing long before 2020. This is not anything new to Northeast Delta Dental. We have been in the diversity, quote unquote, business for a long time. We've had very, very ambitious goals. And after we sat back and reviewed and talked to our legal counsel, and we were in a good spot, and then I could breathe again and sleep again, which was nice. And the concern I had was you put so much effort into it, and you're like, are we being set back here? Where are we going to wind up at the end of this? But I feel we're in the same spot. I don't think it's impacting us. I think our goals remain the same. You literally, I could take your words and say the same thing, right? We want to represent the communities, but I would add Vermont to ours. We want to reflect a positive image to the clients that we represent. We represent we have 1 million lives and over 1 million lives in Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont. How do we represent them? How do they want to see us? And our goals remain as they have been for 20 years. And I love the belonging, right? That's what our goal is. We want people to belong. We understand the D, the E, the I, and whatever other, letters we throw at it, but belonging is the key. And we involve our employees very heavily in our DEI initiatives. You've presented there. We ask them, what do you want to see more of? What do you want to see less of? We don't want that force fed. We don't want people to think we're shoving this ideology down their throats. And we have had some people come to us and say, I'm burnt out on it. It's like, okay, but let me explain to you what we're trying to get to. And I will never forget the first time I saw you speak at our company, and you explained the true meaning behind it all, because people were very confused. The white privilege term, that turned people off. And then when you explained it, so many people came to me and they said, I understand it so differently now. We're not trying to force this on people. We're trying to understand, think outside the box. And that's always been a main goal of ours. And the belonging, I absolutely love the belonging, because that's our ultimate goal. And we feel we've made great progress towards it. It's a race without a finish line, right? Right when you think you got there, they move the goalposts, but you have to be creative and find different ways, especially in New Hampshire, right? We're all kind of looking for better ways to do things. And you learn from people like you guys on the panel and all of you. We learn from our employees too. We don't sit there and say, we're the #1 expert on all of these principles. Come to us and give us ideas. What are we missing? What would you like to see? What's important to you? And that gets us to the belonging part.
Yeah, great. So Michael, your reaction when you heard the decision?
I think my reaction, twofold, was very disappointed and hardly surprised. Very disappointed because what is the effect? What effect is this going to have in higher education? And we have metrics. We know the answer. What's happened in California I think it was 1996, Prop 209 was passed that they got rid of, if you will, affirmative action. Almost overnight, 50% drop of enrollment of minority students. Well, what does that mean? We know that when and this isn't just college, but medical school and law school, and look at the impacts in the community. We know that patients that have communities of color who have doctors of color have better health results and health equity. If you, it's a whole week-long topic to get into, and I'm just learning, to be honest. I learned a lot this morning and thankful for James' work, because there are a lot of good people trying to do the right thing, but we don't know. We don't know how to do it. So very disappointed because of the effect that will cascade, and it will be soon. Hardly surprised. This was not a boating accident. This has been a goal of particular groups for a long time. People don't even understand fully what affirmative action is, and it is not. They think it's a quota. It's not. That's been outlawed since the Bakke decision in, I believe, 78. Why do we even have it? Because it's the benefit of all the students, all of the community. And it was bedrock legal principle, 40 years of precedent, that it was the benefit all of people. It wasn't to benefit the person who was admitted. It was a compelling interest, acknowledged, bedrock legal principle. And the presentation we had earlier on this specific case, that's not a compelling interest in our society, in our global community. So hardly surprised, and we may get into it a little bit more, is who is Students for Fair Admissions? Who are they? It's a nonprofit set up by a billionaire with a right-wing agenda. Was it an accident that this case was brought in 2014? What was happening 2014 to 16, and what just happened in the Supreme Court appointments during one 4-year term? 3 new seats, which of course followed first time in American history, a nominee to the United States Supreme Court not even getting a vote. So that's a long answer to very disappointed, but hardly surprised.
Thanks. Jill, what your impressions when you heard?
That's going to be tough to follow. I do think,
for those of you who know Jill, I've given him license to
Yeah.
speak his mind here.
well, I'm going to speak my mind, and I have
Not that I had to give him license.
I have
to
that
Jill.
liberty as an ACLU attorney, and I do just want to echo, though, there are some reasons to be optimistic. I think there are gaps in this decision that do allow a lot of this work to continue. So I totally agree with James and some of the prior speakers. But I also don't want to sugarcoat how awful this decision is. It is terrible. And we shouldn't be here. We shouldn't even be having this conversation about, oh, how do we continue to do this work in the face of this obstacle? Because this decision is wrong and it fosters white supremacy. I got to name it. You got to name it because it's important. Who is going to benefit from this decision? White people, right? So, I think you just, a lot of your work, you talk about, you just got to name it. I think this decision, you just got to name it. And that's what I'm going to be doing with respect to this decision. And I do think there's something that at least I find very kind of offensive underlying the tone of the majority opinion here. And that's the notion that we're going to use our 14th Amendment. We're going to use Title VI of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Provisions in law designed to ensure equity, to ensure that historically marginalized communities and identities have opportunities that have historically been deprived of them. That was the genesis of those laws. But to use those and turn them on their heads, to now interpret those basically to prevent equity, to allow now those opportunities to continue to exist for white people who have historically benefited from that privilege, I just find very troubling and very problematic, and that is baked into this decision. And I do think, though, as James articulated, that there are ways to continue to do this work, and we have to continue to do this work. It is absolutely critical. I also do think that baked into this opinion is a really dismissiveness, though, of the goals of what we are trying to accomplish in the DEI space. And I think you see that in Justice Roberts' decision, where he really is dismissive of the interests involved here, where he says, and I'm a lawyer and I bring the case with me, so I'm reading it right here. And I'll just close with this. He says, first, the interests that respondents view as compelling can't be subjected to meaningful judicial review. Those interests include training future leaders, acquiring new knowledge based on diverse outlooks, promoting a robust marketplace of ideas, and preparing engaged and productive citizens. While these are commendable goals, they are not sufficiently coherent for purposes of strict scrutiny. Why not? Those are incredibly important goals that we should all be striving for, both in the corporate space and the education space, and to just utterly dismiss them here as, oh, we can't really figure out what that means and how it's achievable. So, we're gonna reject these policies on strict scrutiny grounds, I think is really problematic. And I think, again, to reiterate, is baked into it is a real dismissive notion of just how critical those are. And that's why we're all here, right? To promote those very goals that the court really, I think, just shrugged aside. I'm done now. Thank you.
Yeah. This is why I love Gilles. Because he can dig into the actual content and just bring it up to the level that the rest of us can understand, right, and empathize with. So I want to kind of bring out a point, and you read that decision, that section of the statement there, about how incredibly important it is to, in fact, address those issues and think about how we measure. So I want to ask, so how are you actually measuring success? The success of your DEI efforts?
Again, I think we measure. Thank you. I think we're measuring a lot of ways. Obviously, we're looking at continued, representation of all elements of diversity. Then once we have those folks on team, it's really important to develop them, to promote them, and most important, to retain them, right? So we're looking at, kind of all of those metrics. But I mean, I think what's really important is our work is not really internal, right? I mean, I'm out all the time, right? I'm not just looking at Bangor Savings Bank. We are very involved in making sure that these conversations are happening all the time, every day, every week in Maine and New Hampshire, because that is the only way we're going to change. So we're not just viewing this as only an internal perspective. We feel that as a major employer in these two states, that we have an obligation to make, to ensure that all people have access to employment, access to banking services. So it's really important to keep having these conversations and to challenge, anyone that says, creating empathetic and compassionate leaders is not a good mission. It's crucial. I mean, I think we have to start young in schools to ensure that children are empathetic. They're taught tolerance and understanding and celebrating differences. And I think we all have obligations until the very end to make sure that that work is celebrated. So, we do a lot of work within our two states to make sure that we are celebrating every kind of success. Every time there's a step forward, we want to celebrate it with the individuals involved.
Right. Yeah. Well, what I think is so interesting is, and you brought up this notion of developing leaders. What we're talking about with DEI, we shouldn't be separating as DEI. It's just good leadership.
Yeah, I mean, two amazing elements of like the inclusive leader model. The first is just being curious. So, I mean, that is just something that we even hire for, is we want to see people who are curious and, just want to ask questions, right? Because if you're interested in others, if you're asking really good questions, then you're only going to move forward. The second element that's really important is courage. And I think that's kind of what my takeaway with this decision was, is that organizations have to remember, why did we get into this space? Why is DEI important to our organization? And we have to say, because we are going to get pushback, right? I mean, you would think treating people with dignity and respect shouldn't be political, but we know it is, right? And we get pushback. We've lost lots of customers based upon some of the stances that we've taken, whether it was having our employees be vaccinated, or recently we sponsor Equality Maine, which basically is the largest LGBT support group in Maine. They did some lobbying for abortion and trans rights, and we had political groups contacting our customers saying that we were supporting teen sex change and late-term abortions. Again, of course, we were not doing that, and we did lose some customers from that. But to us, we are going to continue to support the LGBT community. And that's just something that we have to understand. When we're in this business, we have to be courageous.
Right. Ryan, how are you measuring your success in the effort?
Yeah, much like was just mentioned, we don't measure it just internally. Of course, we have our, we have a DEI dashboard. We have many metrics that we use internally, but it's not just based there. We also base it externally. We're heavily involved in community efforts. We want to make sure that people understand. And our motto is, like, from a dental perspective, everyone deserves a healthy smile. I mean, that's kind of the mantra we live by, and that's not limited to one community, one group of people. It's everybody. And that's how we try to reflect internally and externally.
So you mentioned that you have a dashboard. What's on that dashboard? Just to get a little more into the weeds.
Well, now you're trying to give away trade secrets.
Well,
No, just kidding.
Broad brush.
We just like to take a look at, along with our board members, we like to look at what does our blueprint, what does our internal map look like? What are our, male, female, what do we have for BIPOC population? How are we doing with balance, right? We don't have a specific number. That's not anything we've ever discussed. It's just like, what does it look like? What does the recipe look like? Here's what makes up Northeast Delta Dental. And we don't say, oh, geez, we need to get 2 more, females. One, that's not anything we've ever strived for. Yeah. We strive for balance and, more importantly, belonging. That's what we strive for. Yeah. It's never a number. We've never equated a number to it. It's just like, what does it look like? How are we doing? Have we, increased anywhere? How are our efforts being rewarded? And it's not any particular number. We don't say we need 1 more male, 1 more female. It's how does our balance look?
Yeah, great. So, Michael, what are you seeing in your practice and in terms of, how organizations are measuring success in their efforts? And I can speak for the Manchester branch, but I'm curious from the Nashville branch, what are you seeing as the challenges that these organizations are facing?
Law firms or businesses in the area? Both.
Both.
Let me take law firms first. At the risk of stating the obvious, New Hampshire is not majority people of color. That being said, and sitting in this room, I'm reminded of other states telling us that about our New Hampshire primary. What people don't understand is go into the schools in Nashua, go into the schools in Manchester. And the people of color, not only is there a significant, and I'm not just talking African American, we're talking from around the world, AKA American, that it's above the national average in the state of New Hampshire and growing. And so law firms, and I think there's a difference in law firms in New Hampshire between smaller mid-sized firms or what we call in New Hampshire, at least bigger firms, 30 or more lawyers. We're learning. And I think across the board, and very proud of the work that the New Hampshire judicial branch is doing. And people may or may not know this, but they're engaged in active DEI work and a listening tour. They've had 3 listening tours around the state, and I've had the privilege to attend the one in Nashua. There was 9 judges, staff from courts around the state, and literally listened, and there was a judge at every table. And we actually at the Greater Nashua NAACP branch canceled our board meeting to have everyone attend, to say, hey, if the judicial branch is going to take the time to come listen, let's go talk. So that's kind of how I see the legal landscape. Others may have other ideas, but I think the bigger firms very much have active programs, and it's programs and information like you that are providing that are helping us and other businesses learn. And I think these folks can speak to the other businesses at large. That's my take.
Just to piggyback up on that, and I know I started off very negative, and now that that's off my chest, you know, I want to get to the positive, because there's still so much that we can do, and it's so great, frankly, to be in a space like this where everyone recognizes, yes, we still can do things, and we will do them, and we will commit ourselves to them. We won't be scared off by this decision, right? We won't be scared off by some folks in the political space who want to intimidate us not to do this work. And so I think it's wonderful to be in that space where we're all really on the same page and are going to double down and commit ourselves to these efforts, because there still is so much that can be done, as James and the prior speakers said. And it is true that in this decision, the court said that nothing in its opinion should be construed as prohibiting universities from considering an applicant's discussion of how race affected his or her life, be it through discrimination, inspiration, or otherwise. And so the Department of Justice followed up on this in a memo that I'm reading from right now that says this means that universities may continue to embrace appropriate considerations through holistic application review processes, and, for example, provide opportunities to assess how applicants' individual backgrounds and attributes, including those related to race, experiences of racial discrimination, et cetera, position them to contribute to the campus in unique ways. So if we take that in the school context, you can just translate that into the corporate context, and you should, in my view. So I think, you know, there are so many ways to continue to do these efforts, and, you know, we all should. And I just wanted to just highlight that, because I think it's nice to be in this space, and I really appreciate it.
So thank you for that. And I do want to give a shout out. Michael, you mentioned the New Hampshire Judicial Branch's D&I efforts, and Chief Justice Gordon McDonald has done a fantastic job of driving that. And that's, for me, the kind of institutional effort that we need. And I know we've got lawyers in the room and HR folks in the room through your organizations following that lead and supporting that effort is really, really important. I wonder, you know, we're good on time. So what advice do you have? Let's start this at this end this time. What advice do you have for folks about establishing DEI goals, given all of this?
I think the goals are very important, and you can still establish those goals. It's how you implement them that I think, you know, is obviously where some of these legal ramifications will pop up. And I think, you know, quota systems obviously are still would be problematic under Title VII. So that's certainly probably not the route to go. But having goals with respect to hiring, I still think is something that's a good thing. There's nothing that bars very robust recruitment efforts to expand your applicant pool. I want to be very clear about that. And the Department of Justice issued some really fantastic guidance on that following this decision. So expanding that pool as much as possible in order to ensure that you have diverse options, I think is absolutely critical. So just to reiterate, I mean, there's so many things that can and should be done. We probably could spend 6 hours talking about that. And I know James is certainly an expert in this space, and frankly, someone who I look to as we're setting DEI goals for our office and trying to figure out how we at the ACLU create an inclusive environment and a diverse environment for our employees and our staff. So I do just though want to say, you know, once again though, that I'm going to go back to like pessimistic. I was pessimistic and then I was optimistic
Bookcases.
and now I'm going to be
Bookcases for us.
pessimistic again. So the challenges here are real though, right? Like, so I think there are, you know, we talked about all the ways in which you can interpret this decision to continue our work, to maybe even expand our work with some limitations that are clearly delineated, I think, in this decision. But the efforts to attack this work is ongoing. And our opponents are going to try to take this decision and blow a hole in it to prevent all of these things that we think are actually allowed under the decision. So I want to just like be real about that there will be lawsuits, you know, with very aggressive interpretations, over aggressive interpretations of this decision to try to scare and intimidate us from doing the work that is critical to the state of New Hampshire to make this a diverse and equitable place. So let's hold our ground. We all have to hold our ground. And it's wonderful to be on a panel with people who are willing to do that. But I mean, I could tell you right now, and, you know, Attorney Spencer, Amy talked about Justice Gorsuch's concurrence. That's a problem. And there are folks out there who are going to take that concurrence and file lawsuits, and it's happened already over the past several months. You know, I hope those cases will be unsuccessful. I think they should be unsuccessful, but this is part of an incremental step. This is to get to your point, Michael, to get incremental steps to prevent us from doing the work that we need to do. So let's all just be vigilant and hold our ground and don't succumb to these political pressures. It's critical for the state of New Hampshire, for the next generation of professionals coming into this space, that we hold our ground here. So.
Michael, advice for setting DEI goals.
We shall overcome. I'm going to go optimistic on you.
Good.
Because we have to. Because this work is that important. This great experiment that we have called our democracy is that important. And one of the things to think about with DEI goals is, why are the opponents of this so calculating, so committed to this? Why is that? And how, excuse me, that they are able to gather support from the large percentage of our fellow citizens that believe that this is a good thing. This was, thank God, the Supreme Court finally got rid of affirmative action, because it has done something to me. Something's been taken away from me. Who has been telling people this? What effect has that had? So we shall overcome. That is our conversations. It is our duty and our responsibility to have conversations. One of the things work with the NAACP, and I've said this to some of the folks I spoke to this morning, is how much I learn every day. If you just take your head and tilt it a little bit and say, I never would have seen that perspective. I didn't see that. I didn't know about that. So when we're having conversations with our friends and family, try to turn their head a little bit. It's just one conversation at a time, but we are not powerless in this, and to the contrary.
Thank you. So, advice for establishing DEI goals.
Stay on your path. Understand why you originally started the journey of DEI and stay on that path. Understand where you're trying to get to, and remember, if the finish line is not there, right? You have to continue trying to provide a good, diverse workplace, making sure people have a place where they belong and that they have a voice. That's what we try to do. And I love the term expand your applicant pool. That's the term we use. We are always trying to expand our applicant pool, regardless of the representation, which is critical. We want to make sure everybody has that opportunity. And we've discussed a little bit off topic, but, you know, artificial intelligence in recruiting. And I personally don't use it because it would eliminate candidates from our pool. We review every resume and we make sure that we take the time to look at it, because I can teach someone how to do a job. I want to know the people. I don't want it to get ruled out by a catchphrase or a keyword that would eliminate people. And I had a conversation earlier with somebody in here just on that topic alone. And my advice would be keep doing what you're doing because it's critical work. I mean, it was summed up greatly by you two gentlemen. Stay on your path. Don't get pushed backwards.
David, advice for establishing DEI goals. Any thoughts as to, what goals do you establish even?
Well, again, you and I had a conversation this morning, and as somebody who's been doing human resources for 38 years and sort of being asked to sort of make people metrics similar to financial metrics, I found that pretty offensive. We're talking about people. I have to give numbers and look at stats with our board, but I've made it very clear to them, I'm going to spend 25% of my time with them on numbers. The other 75% of the time, I'm going to tell the stories of our employees, how they are still struggling, what are some of their barriers to work, and how do we make it a more inclusive and a place of belonging for our employees. And I think we just have to remember, work is hard. People are struggling, right? I mean, post COVID has done a number. We are dealing with so many employees dealing with anxiety and a lot of other mental health issues. And we have to remember not to put people in numbers. We can't only look at them, from a reporting perspective. And, and you and I were talking a little bit, the other side is powerful in the sense of they are creating this energy around hate. And I guess I hope, in my optimism, that we can create, passion with love and joy and fulfillment. And that if we can do that as powerfully as they do with hate, I believe that we will, again, overcome and win this battle.
All right. And MLK said that love is the only thing that will overcome hate. So we're going to open it up to questions now. And you saw me doing a little fiddling with my phone because I'm actually logged onto Zoom. So I'm going to be able to capture if someone on our online set of folks types in a question. So questions from the audience. Lauren.
But I wanted to think about what I believe to be the next challenge, which is employees' religious freedom versus diversity and inclusion.
So the question is, what do we think about the notion of employees' religious freedom versus diversity in the workplace? I don't know, you guys want to, anybody want to take that?
I mean, I can say what has already happened, right? When we were doing, had a mandated for vaccinations during COVID, we, of course, allowed religious exemptions. I would say that and so we had about 30 employees who submitted the exact same religious factor, which of course was very political in nature, but we had to accept it. If they are saying this was for religious purposes, we honored their right to do that, and they continued to work with us even though they weren't vaccinated. So that was just one example. So I think each situation, right, we have to take it as it comes. But for that one, that was the last one that we really dealt with regarding religious exemptions.
I agree. I mean, I'm very concerned about this issue. The lens through which I principally look at it is less the employer context, but more the public accommodations context. So it's related, there's not complete overlap, but significant overlap. There is a movement afoot, not too different from the movement that we've seen to ban affirmative action, to create carve-outs with respect to our anti-discrimination laws. We've seen it most recently in the 303 creative case that concerns the ability of a small company owner to create a website and use that person's religious beliefs to deny services to LGBTQ folks. And that was deemed to be protected under the First Amendment. And so allowing that type of discrimination to occur on First Amendment grounds. And that's something that I'm really concerned about, right? The kind of weaponization of these constitutional principles to actually hurt people, right? To cause discrimination, to foster discrimination, to damage and further stigmatize historically marginalized communities and identities. And so not too similar from the theme that you see in Students for Fair Admissions, right? Which is a weaponization of these principles to hurt others. So I am very concerned that we are going to continue to see this kind of key theme throughout all of these legal doctrines: affirmative action, public accommodations, maybe even the employer-employee context. So this is a real thing to be very vigilant about.
And at multiple levels, not just at the federal level, but also at the state level, we're seeing that too. Anybody else have a thought on that one before we go to another?
Just the other follow-up is, and look where we are with voting rights and the Voting Rights Act that has already been gutted, because we don't need any remedial action at all, because it's clearly intended to create a level playing field. That doesn't appear to be the legislation that's going on around a number of our states, trying to level the playing field. In fact, to the contrary.
I mean, just to bring it home to New Hampshire, right? And another example of this is the classroom censorship law that was enacted 2 years ago. So what did the proponents of that law do? They put the classroom censorship law in our state's anti-discrimination law, basically weaponizing that statute to basically promote anti-DEI principles. So that was what happened. So it's happening right here, the weaponization of these anti-discrimination laws to actually hurt communities. And that's, I just wanted to bring that home because it's right here.
So Jill, just since you mentioned it, what's the state of that case?
So that law was enacted in June of 2021. It was passed as part of the budget. A lawsuit was filed by multiple organizations, the ACLU, NEA, AFT, New Hampshire as well, on behalf of educators, and in our case, on behalf of 2 DEI school administrators who are doing amazing work in this space, actually trying to promote all of these principles, but in schools. And they've stood up saying that this law is wrong. This hurts our communities. The very sense of belonging that we're trying to create in all these amazing corporations represented here, that they're trying to create in schools for their students, they cannot do their work with this law. And so that has been challenged. A motion to dismiss was survived. Discovery occurred, and there'll actually be a final hearing this January where a court will decide whether it's constitutional or not.
Great, something to watch. Yep, Monica. Yeah, so for the folks on video, Monica's just making the comment about who's looking at the more local offices and who's actually in those local offices, like school board level offices and library trustees, are institutions in our local level that are also shaping what our youth see and learn, and what information gets shared in our communities. Who's watching out for that? Who's looking out for those? And it kind of has to be all of us, right? We all are responsible in our own geographic locations for watching out for who's on the school board, for going to school board meetings, and not just letting the folks who are really organized, as Michael and Jill have said, with their negative messages, their messages of, well, we're being hurt because of all this, right? We all have to combat that. Yes. Hmm. Right, so the comment, the kind of the question is, Michael talked about the slight tilting of your perspective. That very slight tilting is what is really effective, and you don't have to have a huge tilting, but just a slight tilting. And that's been effectively used by those who are proponents of this decision. And the discussion about the word compelling and who really defines what's compelling, and the notion that minor changes, just linguistics changes, semantic changes, have a huge impact. Right? So what do we think about all that?
First, I want to talk about your compelling, and how I would understand that. It's a constitutional analysis, and having applied the concept of strict scrutiny, you need to have a compelling interest to support that. So that's more to the legal analysis as opposed to how we would say compelling in normal human speak. And I want, in regard to the head tilt, I heard an example about affirmative action just in the last week or so. And the concept, the premise, without question, why people are under attack and things being taken away, I would have been accepted, but for it went to someone who wasn't as qualified. I worked just as hard. That's not fair. Well, we can geez, that doesn't seem fair. Tilt. The analogy was, you go to a parking lot, Walmart, pick a store that as the season comes and we're less and less parking spots, right? And so there's a full parking lot, there's one spot left. That concept is, well, it was you and another car, and darn it, that other car got in. That isn't the reality. The reality is there were 30,000 other cars. You were one of those, and one spot. Tilt. Okay, this isn't the level of people that impacted or alleged to be victimized by affirmative action, which appears to me to be the premise of folks who are the proponent of it. And the last thing I want to you brought up the education status issues going on in our state, because I don't have children in the schools. But through my work at the NAACP, I did not realize the extent of what had been happening in New Hampshire. I'm paying attention a lot more now. And at the school board level, for people that don't know, in our state, what else is going on? I've had 3 or 4 pieces of litigation in the Superior Court dealing with the Proud Boys with AR-15s at school board meetings in Nashua. I've had people of color on the school board who needed judicial protection in Nashua, New Hampshire. Okay, so this isn't some esoteric debate going on that we're having these questions.
So we're just at time, and we have one question. Thank you for that. We have one question from the chat. Can the panel talk more about how to get buy-in from employees, especially in light of the resistance being fostered by others against DEI efforts? So experience here.
Again, I mean, we have a promise to our employees that you matter more, and we deliver that promise to our customers and our communities. So we just continue to talk about you matter more means knowing how to customize the way you work with what people want. We also are really focused on allyship. So as a lot of organizations are focused on employee resource groups to really make sure individual voices are being heard, we are really focused a lot in our culture, because it is about that caring culture, about really teaching people to be allies and to make sure that they can speak for others and have that perspective. So we kind of like that. That's unique, I think, to what we're doing. But again, it fits our culture really well.
Last word.
Yeah, probably. I think an important part of getting employee buy-in is you have to have strong leadership. You have to have a CEO, executive leaders who believe in this principle and support it and spread it. It's not something you check off a box and say, we did 2 trainings this year, we're done. right? It's a constant ideology that we try to promote internally. And you're never going to have everybody buy into it. You are going to have detractors. It's part of the journey. Be fair and consistent, and understand, you said it earlier and it's stuck in my brain. It goes beyond ethnicity, race. There are so many other parts of DEI. You know, we've tried to focus on generational workforce, just other ideas that made us tilt our head and say there's other things to this. And that's what we try to do. Just get people to understand, and we try to be fair and consistent with them and let them have a voice and have a part of the trainings and what we're trying to do. And we've gotten a long way with it, and we understand we've got more to do, but that's how you do it. It's not something you do one day, and it's about quality, not quantity. It's how we try to promote internally. It's not checking boxes. I love what you said earlier, right? It's not a number game. These are people. It's human emotions. It's human feelings. And sometimes you have to respect the opposition to some of what you're trying to do and listen to them and try to understand, and then try to promote to them why this is the journey that you're on.
Great, thank you. So thanks to the panel for great discussion and insights. And it's, as with any session, we want to leave you with a call to action. If you're an executive, ask your legal counsel or consultants about the 3 types of DEI goals. If you're legal counsel, go beyond mere compliance. And if you're a consultant, push for full DEI B, not just the D, which is what so many small organizations focus on. So with that, thank you all for being here. Have a great day.